September 14th, 1936, Madrid. A convoy of military trucks rolls through the darkness toward the Bank of Spain. Most people believe Spain lost the Civil War because Franco had better generals or German bombers ruled the skies. That's the story we tell ourselves. But here's the truth that nobody wants to admit. Spain didn't lose the war on the battlefield. Spain lost the war the moment it handed over its entire national treasury to Joseph Stalin. This isn't a story about military strategy or political ideology. This is a story about the ledger, about bankruptcy disguised as solidarity, about the moment a desperate government chose insolvency over invasion. Picture Spain in the summer of 1936. The vaults beneath the Plaza de Cibeles held 700 tons of pure gold. That's the fourth largest gold reserve on the planet. More gold than most empires could dream of accumulating in 1,000 years. The banks were full. The currency was backed. Spain had the balance sheet of a superpower. These weren't just numbers in an accounting book. This was centuries of accumulated wealth from the Americas. Silver from Potosi, gold from Mexico and Peru. The residual fortune of an empire that once controlled half the known world. And during World War I, while Europe bled itself dry funding mechanized slaughter, Spain stayed neutral and got rich. Spanish factories sold steel to both sides. Spanish mines shipped coal to everyone. And Spain demanded payment in one thing only: gold, solid, physical, incorruptible gold. By 1936, that gold reserve represented something more valuable than money. It represented credibility. It meant Spanish currency was worth something on international markets. It meant foreign suppliers would accept Spanish checks. It meant the nation could borrow if it needed to. The gold was the foundation. Everything else was built on top of it, but beneath the surface, the foundation was rotting. When the Civil War exploded in July 1936, the Republican government faced an immediate economic trap. They had gold, but they needed guns. They had wealth, but they needed weapons. And the democracies of the West, Britain and France and America, slammed their doors shut. The arms embargo was absolute. These champions of democracy refused to sell a single rifle to Spain's democratically elected government. Meanwhile, Franco was receiving unlimited credit from Hitler and Mussolini. German tanks, Italian planes, Moroccan mercenaries, all on extended payment terms that Franco could settle after he won. The Republic was being strangled by its own allies. Enter the Soviet Union. Stalin looked at Spain and saw opportunity. Not ideological opportunity. Financial opportunity. He understood something fundamental about desperate governments. They pay premium prices. They accept terrible terms. They sign contracts they would never sign in peacetime. Stalin wasn't running a charity for endangered democracies. He was running a protection racket on a geopolitical scale. And the price of protection was everything Spain had. The addiction started immediately. Soviet weapons began arriving in the autumn of 1936. T-26 tanks, I-16 fighter planes, artillery pieces, ammunition by the shipload. These weapons worked. They stopped Franco's advance on Madrid. They saved the Republic from immediate collapse. But every tank came with a price tag. Every bullet was logged in Moscow's account books. And the exchange rates were set by the Soviets. The markup was set by the Soviets. The final bill was calculated by the only people who had access to the ledgers. By September, Juan Negrin, the Minister of Finance, faced an impossible calculation. Franco's armies were 20 kilometers from Madrid. If they captured the capital, they would capture the Bank of Spain. And if they captured the bank, they would capture the gold. With that fortune, Franco could buy unlimited weapons. He could hire every mercenary in Europe. He could literally purchase Spain's submission. The gold had to be moved. But moved where? France was unreliable. Britain was hostile. The only nation answering the phone was the Soviet Union. The plan was sold as protective custody. The gold would be shipped to Moscow for safekeeping. Stalin would guard it in Soviet vaults. When the war ended and democracy was restored, every ounce would be returned. It sounded reasonable. It sounded like banking. But this wasn't banking. This was a heist disguised as a deposit. The operation began on September 14th in total secrecy. Even the President of the Republic wasn't fully informed until it was too late. Teams of workers descended into the vaults 30 meters below Madrid. These were chambers carved from bedrock, protected by massive steel doors that required 3 separate keys turned simultaneously. The security was designed to stop armies, but the enemy had the keys. The enemy had official authorization. The enemy was the government itself. 700 tons of gold doesn't move easily. Think about that weight. Each wooden crate held 65 kilograms of metal. It took 2 grown men straining to lift a single box. The gold was packed in old ammunition crates reinforced with extra boards. Some of it was in standard bars, 12 kilograms each, stamped with Spanish seals. But half of it was in coins. Millions of individual coins from around the world. British sovereigns, American double eagles, French Napoleons, Spanish doubloons that had crossed the Atlantic in galleon holds centuries ago. The workers loaded these crates onto trucks in the middle of the night. A convoy stretched along Madrid's boulevards, motors idling in the darkness. The drivers hadn't been told what they were transporting, but you cannot hide the nature of gold. When a small box requires 2 men to lift it, when trucks ride low on their suspension, the weight tells its own story. Rumors spread immediately, but the security was absolute. Carabineros with rifles watched every movement. Nobody dared speak their suspicions aloud. The destination was Cartagena, 450 kilometers southeast. The journey through war-torn countryside took days. The trucks drove without headlights to avoid German bombers. They navigated by moonlight through roads damaged by fighting. There were breakdowns, there were delays. But the security never slipped. This was Spain's entire economic foundation on wheels. When the convoy finally reached Cartagena, the gold was stored in old naval magazines carved into limestone cliffs. Ancient caves that had once held gunpowder now held the fortune of a nation. For a few weeks, the gold sat in those caves, while final negotiations continued. The man coordinating everything on the Soviet side was Alexander Orlov. He was NKVD, Stalin's personal spy master in Spain. Orlov didn't just oversee the gold transfer. He ran secret prisons where anti-Stalinist leftists were tortured. He orchestrated political assassinations. He was Stalin's enforcer, making sure that if the republic survived, it would be a pro-Soviet republic. And now he was in charge of the largest fortune Spain possessed. Years later, after Orlov defected to America, he published his memoirs. He revealed that he received a coded telegram directly from Stalin at this crucial moment. The message was chillingly simple. Load the gold onto Soviet ships, send it to Odessa immediately. And then Stalin added one more line that revealed everything. The Spanish will never see their gold again, just as they do not see their own ears. Before a single crate left Spanish soil, Stalin had already decided to steal it all. This wasn't safekeeping, it was theft. In late October 1936, 4 Soviet freighters arrived in Cartagena harbor: the Kim, the Neva, the Volgoles, and the Kursk. Ordinary merchant vessels painted in drab colors that attracted no attention. The loading operation began on October 22nd and stretched across 3 nights of continuous labor. Orlov personally selected every worker. Only Spanish Communist Party members whose loyalty to Moscow was absolute. He told them the crates contained ammunition that needed to be moved before nationalist air raids. But again, the weight betrayed the lie immediately. 7,800 crates, 510 tons of gold, 73% of Spain's total reserve. It took 3 nights to load it all. The ship sat low in the water, groaning under the massive cargo. On October 25th, they slipped quietly out of Cartagena and headed east into the dark Mediterranean. 4 anonymous freighters carrying the economic foundation of an entire nation. The voyage to Odessa took weeks. The ships hugged the North African coast to avoid nationalist warships and German submarines. They maintained radio silence. They were ghost ships creeping along coastlines like criminals avoiding detection. When they finally reached Odessa in early November, everything changed. The moment those ships docked in Soviet territory, Spain's gold physically entered Soviet control. The NKVD took over completely. The port was cleared of all normal workers. Troops lined the streets. The crates were unloaded directly onto armored trains with reinforced steel walls and armed guards. The trains carried their cargo north across the vast Russian steppe. Days of travel through countryside that no Spaniard had ever seen. Eventually they arrived in Moscow, and the gold was taken to Gokran, the Kremlin's treasure house. This was the moment when Spain's wealth disappeared from independent verification. From this point forward, everything would be controlled, documented, and reported exclusively by Soviet officials. No outside observers, no international auditors, no oversight. The counting process took months. Spanish officials who had traveled to Moscow were allowed to watch. But they couldn't participate. They couldn't touch the gold. They had to stand behind wooden barriers like museum visitors, while Soviet clerks weighed every bar and counted every coin. It must have been profoundly humiliating. These were professionals who had spent their careers managing Spain's finances. Now they were reduced to passive spectators while foreigners handled their country's wealth. Discrepancies appeared immediately. Soviet counters reported that many crates contained fewer coins than Spanish manifests claimed. Sometimes the difference was small. Dozens of coins here and there. But sometimes hundreds were missing from a single crate. Orlov later suggested the wooden crates were old and roughly handled. Perhaps coins had fallen out through cracks during the truck journey from Madrid. Perhaps the Spanish count had been hasty and inaccurate. These were plausible explanations. But there's a darker possibility that fits perfectly with how Stalin's Soviet Union actually operated. Consider the temptation. You're a poorly paid Soviet bureaucrat working in the gold depository. You live in a cramped communal apartment. You barely have enough to eat. And suddenly you have access to millions of gold coins, each one worth more than your monthly salary. All you have to do is slip a handful into your pocket when nobody's looking. Who would notice a few missing coins out of millions? Who would dare investigate in Stalin's Moscow, where asking questions could get you shot? In a system as thoroughly corrupt as the Soviet bureaucracy, it would be surprising if everyone kept their hands clean. Officially, the count was completed in early 1937. A final receipt was issued on impressive Soviet stationery. It stated that the Soviet Union was holding approximately 510 tons of gold on behalf of the Spanish Republic. The gold would be returned whenever the legitimate Spanish government requested it. It all sounded professional and reassuring. The Spanish officials signed the documents. What choice did they have? They were in Moscow, thousands of kilometers from home, completely at Stalin's mercy. Then came the bills. The Republic needed weapons desperately. The Battle of Madrid was raging. Republican militias were fighting street by street. They sent urgent telegrams to Moscow requesting immediate shipments, and Stalin delivered. Soviet T-26 tanks helped stop Franco's armored advances. Soviet I-16 fighters could match German aircraft. These weapons saved Madrid, at least temporarily. Without Soviet military aid, the Republic would have collapsed in late 1936. But Stalin delivered these weapons at a price that would make loan sharks blush. The Soviet Union charged for everything. They charged for the tanks. They charged for the fuel. They charged for spare parts. They charged for ammunition. They charged for the salaries of Soviet advisors. They even charged Spain for the transportation costs of shipping its own gold to the Soviet Union. Think about that. Spain was being charged for the privilege of having its wealth stolen. But the real fraud was in the exchange rates and pricing. When the Soviets sold Spanish gold on international markets, they got full market price. Gold is gold. But when they credited Spain's account in Moscow, they used a special manipulated exchange rate that made the ruble look strong and the peseta look weak. This allowed the Soviets to skim a percentage off every ounce sold. Then came the pricing scam. The Republic desperately needed weapons. They would send shopping lists to Moscow. We need 100 tanks. We need 50 planes. And the Soviets would set prices with no negotiation possible. The Republic couldn't shop around. There was nobody else. The Soviets exploited this monopoly ruthlessly. They emptied their old warehouses of equipment left over from World War I. They sent artillery pieces captured from the White Russians in the 1920s. They sent rifles that were literally rusting. They sent ammunition that sometimes didn't work. And they charged cutting-edge prices for all of it. Historians estimate the markup was between 30 and 40% above fair market value. The Soviets were charging a desperation tax, exploiting Spain's complete dependence. Perhaps the most cynical charge was for Soviet personnel. The Soviet Union sent thousands of advisors to Spain. Some were genuine military professionals who trained Spanish troops and fought alongside them. But many were NKVD agents whose real job was ensuring Soviet control over Spanish politics. They ran interrogation centers. They organized purges of anti-Stalinist leftists. They interfered in Spanish political decisions. And the Spanish Republic had to pay their salaries. Spain was funding its own oppression with its own gold. By 1938, after barely 2 years, the gold account was running dangerously low. The burn rate of modern warfare was astronomical. Tanks consumed fuel at terrifying rates. Artillery pieces fired thousands of shells in single battles. Planes crashed and had to be replaced. The Soviets started sending warning letters. "Your credit is running low," they wrote. "Please be advised that your account cannot sustain current expenditure levels." And critically, they started slowing weapons shipments. Deliveries that arrived weekly became monthly. Orders took longer to process. In the final desperate months of the war, the Republic was fighting with one hand tied behind its back. Spanish soldiers were rationing ammunition, told to fire only when absolutely necessary. Pilots flew planes held together with improvised repairs and prayers. And all the while, the gold that could have bought new equipment sat in the Kremlin, melted down into anonymous bars, being sold on international markets to fund Soviet industrial development. When the war finally ended on April 1, 1939, the ledgers in Moscow were ceremoniously closed. Soviet accountants prepared a final accounting. According to Soviet calculations, prepared entirely without independent verification, Spain had spent every single ounce of the 510 tons, every coin, every bar. In fact, the Soviets claimed Spain had spent more than the gold was worth. They claimed Spain died owing the Soviet Union $50 million for weapons provided on credit after the gold ran out. It was perfect. The victim was dead, and the thief held all the paperwork. But the story had a haunting afterlife. Juan Negrin, the man who signed the original order, fled Spain as the Republic collapsed. He lived in exile in France and England, a broken man hated by both sides. Hated by Franco's nationalists as a traitor who sold Spain to the communists. Hated by many Republicans who felt he destroyed any chance of victory. But Negrin did one final honorable thing. Throughout his exile, he kept the papers, all the documents related to the gold operation, the receipts signed by Soviet officials, the telegrams, the accounting records. On his deathbed in 1956, Negrin instructed his son to hand these papers over to the Spanish government. To Franco's government, the regime that had denounced him for years. It was an act of supreme patriotism that transcended politics. Negrin hated Franco, but he loved Spain more. He wanted the Spanish state to have proof of what had been done. When Franco's ministers received these documents, they were stunned. For years they had claimed the gold was stolen, but they had been working from rumor. Now they had proof, official Soviet receipts, but they also saw the final balance sheet. And that balance sheet showed the money was completely gone. Alexander Orlov understood the purge before it reached him. In 1938, as Stalin recalled Soviet advisors from Spain one by one, Orlov saw the pattern. Everyone who knew too much was being erased. If he returned to Moscow, he would be executed within hours. So Orlov made an unthinkable choice. He defected. He stole $60,000 from NKVD funds and vanished into America. Before disappearing, he sent Stalin a letter, an insurance policy. If Orlov or his mother were harmed, he would publish everything, the purges, the crimes, the theft of Spain's gold. Stalin believed him. Orlov lived quietly for decades, teaching, waiting. When his memoirs finally appeared in the 1950s, the truth surfaced at last. By then, the gold was already gone. Not hidden, destroyed. Stalin ordered Spain's historic coins melted down in Soviet furnaces, recast into anonymous bars. No stamps, no origin, just gold, laundered clean of history. Sold through London, Zurich, New York. Used to buy machinery, grain, factories. In a bitter irony, Spanish gold helped defeat fascism, just not in Spain. It powered the Soviet war machine that crushed Hitler years later. Spain lost its wealth, its sovereignty, and its republic. The gold vanished into the world economy. The betrayal did not.